So the F1 2021 season got underway this last weekend, and we are back. Myself and Toby are going to be talking about the Bahrain Grand Prix and also giving a little bit of a rundown of how we think the teams are going to shape up this season after seeing them for that one weekend and maybe 3 days of testing as well, because we all know how reliable testing is. Hello to my co-host, Toby Jones. How are you doing?
Very good. I'm glad we're back. It's been a long, nigh on 4 months since the last race, but really glad to be back. And what a race to start with.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, the main headline is, of course, Max versus Lewis, and I think that's where we'll start off today. Just a quick reminder that we are available on Spotify and all other good podcasting sites as well if you are listening on YouTube on our new channel. So make sure you click the subscribe button and leave a like down below to show your support for this first episode. And we're going to try and make this a much more regular thing. So, Max versus Lewis, how did you feel about that battle on Sunday and Saturday as well, I suppose, but mainly with Sunday?
Well, they always say that there's only one day that you win the points. That might change this year with the sprint races, who knows? But there's only one day where you win points, and that's Sunday. And although Max absolutely aced it on Saturday and got pole by nearly 4 tenths, and to be honest, I just couldn't believe that, because more to the point of the whole Mercedes are sandbagging thing, which we all really knew. I remember a few years ago where Toto Wolff said they were worried about Williams. So to say that they were behind Red Bull was just typical PR and all that jazz. But for Max to actually be 4 tenths ahead when it matters, I thought, wow, we've got a race on here, because I knew that really Mercedes have got better race pace realistically, and that we've seen it all too often before that Lewis has gone for a different strategy and Max has chased him down, albeit not so exciting as this race. Maybe because Max had got it all to lose, I don't know. I think in previous Grand Prix last year, when Max was chasing Lewis down, we sort of thought that Max was the underdog and Lewis was the favourite, but it was role reversal. And let's not mention the track limits issue yet, but it's going to be a very, very interesting season. It's going to be up and down. My one worry towards that battle and how close it will be is that race there is the weakest that Mercedes are going to be all season long. And I think over the season, Mercedes are probably going to develop their car better. And that worries me, not in terms of Lewis going on and dominating, but because of the show. We've been crying out for a title race since 2016. And let's be brutally honest, Valtteri Bottas isn't going to provide that. And Sergio Perez isn't going to provide that this year, because it's going to take him a few races to get into the Red Bull. And let's be fair, his luck wasn't really on this weekend. So realistically, we are looking at a two-way battle. Not an inter-team battle, but a battle between teams of Red Bull and Mercedes. And bring it on. Lewis is still very much by far favourite, I think, for the championship. But we've got an incredible battle in prospect. And if it's anywhere near that sort of closeness in Imola, Spain, even Monaco, well, bring it on.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more on that. And I think a very interesting point there that you brought up was Bahrain is traditionally a reasonably weak Mercedes circuit, mainly because of the temperature. And I think over the last few years, hot circuits have been Mercedes' Achilles heel, and potentially, they've won that Grand Prix, and they did it a little bit last year as well, where they were potentially the underdogs but ended up winning the Grand Prix anyway. Lewis Hamilton coming from way down on the grid and poor starts and whatever, and just somehow finding a way to win. And I felt like that was history repeating itself on Sunday, rightly or wrongly, because of the track limits. And but I completely agree with you. It's hopefully going to be a much better season than it was last year and even the year before. And even if we get sort of half of a season of a title battle, then that is something that we can at least look forward to going forward with 2022. We've obviously got big hopes for that season and closing the grid up a little bit. But to sort of nail that track limits argument down. Obviously, Lewis Hamilton, I think it was counted that he extended the track 29 times at that particular corner. And of course, after that 29th time, Mercedes were told, let's rein it in a little bit, and Hamilton wasn't allowed to do it from then. And of course, there was the overtake from Max Verstappen that he did extend the track. He went a little bit wide and potentially gained an advantage, made the pass off the circuit. What do you think about that? Do you think it's BS, or do you think it was fair enough that the stewards making that decision?
I don't think it's the steward's decision that was the problem. I don't think it's the steward's decision that many people have got a problem with.
Mm-hmm.
It's that consistency applying track limits. The rule is, and there's an obvious rule that most of us know about, that if you overtake off the circuit, you should give the position back. And I've got absolutely no problem with that. And the right decision was made to let Lewis back through. And unfortunately, from a racing standpoint from then, forgetting about regulations, because we always sometimes get tied up too much in this. If we look at the general race of this, it's so disappointing that effectively I think Max had used all his willpower to try and get past Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
And then by hook or by crook, Lewis managed to stay ahead after that, which was a shame almost, because I think it robbed us of a battle somewhat. I guess you could counter that by saying if Max had got past on the track, he'd have just ridden away. But I think after that, we expected to have more of a, dare I say, Hamilton-Rosberg scrap from 14, whereby there was that real good scrap, of course, we had, but there was a little bit of traffic involved, but I think even without that traffic, Max had done all he could have done, and that was that. The issue was consistency, and the track limits throughout the weekend apparently were consistent. But for me, why would Hamilton have gone wide that many times? Because the issue with track limits is that you should only go off the track, or you're only allowed to go off the track if you lose time. So why would Hamilton conveniently go off the track once every 2 laps? 29 laps out of 56. So why would he do that? And there's one answer, and that's to gain time, to be able to brake later into the corner, have effectively a wider corner to turn into, and maybe gain 1 or 2 tenths a lap. And the problem then is when you start thinking about that, even a tenth a lap is 3 seconds over a 30-lap period. So let's just think about that for a minute. And Max maybe would have gained the time 5-6 laps earlier. And then he'd have made probably that overtake. Would the tyres have been gone by then? And that's often the problem with Formula One, that we always deal in a world of what ifs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the real issue with it. What if they'd have pulled him up from lap 1 about those track limits? The problem is consistency, and it's just a real shame that already within one race of the year we've got this silly argument. I just hate these arguments that always seem to come to fruition, particularly with F1, and more so with football over the last few years with VAR, that if this sort of happened, then what would have happened then? It's such a tricky one, but I think with track limits, it should have been policed. Would it have affected the race if he'd have been told from day one, Hamilton, to not do that? We'll never know, because we've had one chance at the race and that's it. Yeah. But to answer your original question, to completely go off on a tangent, about track limits, was it fair to penalise Max Verstappen? Absolutely. Should Lewis Hamilton have been penalised for going off the track 29 times? Within the regulations, no. But if you're only being warned once after 29 laps, then that's not Mercedes' problem. It's like any sport. You're going to try and make the most of that. And I'm sure it wasn't just Hamilton who made the most of that. I bet that there were other drivers on the grid. Mm-hmm. But because they didn't win the race, it wasn't publicised as much.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. And there was a lot of talk about track limits over the weekend, and there was a lot of talk about these race directors' notes that come out on a Thursday or something, about how it would be monitored in practice and qualifying, which it was. And Bottas famously had 8 laps in a row, was it? Or was it just 8 laps overall that were deleted? And of course, Perez had his lap deleted in Q2, which potentially cost him getting through the chance to get through to Q3. And there was no mention of the race on those notes, and that was Mercedes' argument and Lewis's argument of why he was allowed to do it. And as you say, I'm sure there were many other drivers. I'm fairly sure one of the McLarens was definitely doing it as well. So, yeah, I agree with you. I think it's completely fair enough. That moment that the stewards gave Hamilton the warning and said, right, you will get a black and white flag the next time you do that. I think that was where they put their foot down and said, right, this is the limit now. And, that applied to everyone from that point. Now, okay, Lewis had 29 occurrences of it, but there was a rule in place, and Max went past that. As we always say, if that was a wall in Monaco, he would have went into it. So, that I think it's fair enough. I think it was partly Max's problem of where he let Lewis back past. I think he was a little bit peed off and maybe didn't think about where he let Lewis back past, and that cost him extra time. And there's the traffic argument, and but it was a good battle, and hopefully more of that to come, and hopefully with the other 2 cars from those teams as well. I'd love to see Bottas and Perez fighting up there and making it a 4-way battle, and then it really would feel like 2012, 2010 esque
Let's
type
just
of
iron
season.
something out. It's not going to happen with Bottas, is it? It is not going to happen with Bottas. I have given Bottas so many chances, it is painful. And how many different versions of Bottas we get, whether he eats porridge, shredded wheat, or Weetabix.
Whether he has a mustache or a beard, or
It really doesn't matter. Bottas isn't in that league. It's far too early to say the same about Perez. I mean, talking about Perez, didn't he have a great race? I think he fully deserved that driver of the day tag, which, on another tone, I think that's become a bit stupid now. Because what really... I know this is incredibly going off on a tangent, but it's come into my mind. What is the point of the driver of the day, really? Because I would have been quite happy for a bit of sarcasm to give it to Mazepin, but they didn't. All those years ago, they gave it to Haryanto in that first race, and now it should have been Mazepin, but it wasn't. I guess that the driver of Perez deserved driver of the day. If there wasn't a Perez in the grid, who on earth would you have given driver of the day to? Because nobody did anything that was particularly special.
Yeah, I guess maybe Lewis for his defensive drive, his out of the box strategy thinking, but that's not necessarily Lewis that's doing that. And
but then I think you get a
Lewis moans anyway.
The winner gets driver of the day every week, much like in football where the commentators give it the goal scorer because it's the easy thing to do. Sorry for making all the football analogies, but it seems to work. But back to Perez, early evidence showed that he had quite a few setbacks starting from the pit lane, and he still managed to finish 5th. Now, probably could have finished 4th, potentially. And there was a safety car, which did help him, yes. There's all those elements to it, but wouldn't Alex Albon have been able to do that? Probably not. So, it's too early to say, but I think Red Bull have made a good decision there. And more to the point, Bottas has got a real problem, because if his teammate's winning races, he could be down in 4th. And although by law of averages, 37 compared to 33 with Red Bull will win Mercedes the Constructors. But if you get a circuit where McLaren are strong, if AlphaTauri are in there, because AlphaTauri are a real interesting prospect, the only team that we don't know where they are yet because of the collision damage for Gasly and because Tsunoda started low down. We don't know where they are. Mercedes could have a real problem by the mid-season if Red Bull are ahead in the Constructors, and I think Perez is only going to get stronger. The only help that Mercedes could have in that is if they do develop over the year, and by car performance, Bottas then pushes ahead of Perez and maybe Max.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I think we've seen shades of it last season. Bottas was in by far the best car, not finishing second, and that was potential alarm bells, and he seems to do the opposite of Kimi. Kimi used to perform really well, get his contract extension, and then go off at the end of the year. Bottas seems to, I don't know, do rubbish, somehow get a contract extension, and then do all right towards the end of the season. But it's
Mm.
yeah, I think that's certainly worth a discussion later when we do our rundown of the teams, and maybe looking ahead to 2022 of whether we see Bottas and indeed Perez in the frame for those drives. But back to Max and Lewis, just to quickly finish off on that note. If you were a betting man, Toby, and I know you do like a flutter now and again, who would your money be on for the 2021 title right now after one race?
The odds would be pretty poor, but you just can't look away from Lewis, can you? Anything else would be ridiculous. I could say Max to be all exciting, but it's not even a safe bet. But to be realistic, you can't look over a season, the longest season we've had yet as well. You can't look past Lewis. A, because of Lewis himself, 7-time champion, and B, what I mentioned earlier about Mercedes are going to develop over the year, and also C, not necessarily because of Max, but last year Max had some really bad luck with going out of race and all that, and I think that driver ability comes into it, but me being a bit jealous and biased, it almost seems like that a lot of things play into Hamilton's hands, and that's nothing against Hamilton, but it's just that thing if you've got to be in the right place at the right time, and more often than not, Hamilton is.
Yeah, no, I think winning is very much a habit in Formula One, and Lewis has very much got that winning
Yeah,
habit,
yeah.
and bar a few DNFs in 2016, we'd already be looking at an 8-time world champion here, and um, it's it's pretty scary what he could go on to do, depending on what he decides to do at the end of this year. But that is a discussion for another time. But I think the sensible money is on Lewis. You wouldn't get much money back for that. You'd have to probably bet your house to get any returns on it. But
More than likely.
yeah, it was a good battle, and hopefully that continues. So, just a general chat about the Bahrain Grand Prix. We've touched on a couple of the points with Perez and Bottas, but it was another race of strategy, and I think that was the big disappointment for me of the Bahrain Grand Prix is for all the wonderful battling we had at the end, and the tension, and not knowing who was actually going to win it for once. It kind of came down to strategy essentially, and who had the best strategy. And I know we were talking over Facebook earlier in the Grand Prix, and we were just like, well, they're on different strategies now, so it's going to be decided in the pit stops. But what threw a spanner in the works was Mercedes having a really terrible stop for Bottas, so it did just become a 2-horse race in the end. But I think that would have been a really interesting point. So, how do you feel about strategy? Do you enjoy the strategy battles, or would you prefer to see more of the talking done on the track?
I think there's only one answer to that. If you're a true racing fan, you want to see it done on the track, but because of the current regulations, and for a long time now, it's all been about the strategy, because you can't follow and all the rest of it, and how having tyres that are a few laps younger can make so much of a difference. It is all about strategy, and that's just something you've got to accept. But in fairness, we had some good racing, as always, in the midfield. The direction of the race was peculiar at times. We saw somebody like Kimi coming in for a pit stop when there was a battle for fourth. I never quite understand that logic. But
Yeah.
there is definitely, as we alluded to, potential there for throughout the field to have a good scrap. And although I would say the field is fairly well set, we know where teams are. There's clumps of teams that can be interchangeable, so that's going to be really enjoyable to see.
No. Yeah, I agree with that. I think honestly that the strategy argument has been ever since refueling left F1, and I think potentially having some sort of refueling in F1, or charge levels, I don't know what they'll do in the future, but that could potentially shake things up a little bit, because you would end up with your Giancarlo Fisichella type people in 2009 just filling the car with fuel and trying to go as long as possible, and then you would have certain teams under fueling so that they can try and go for pole position. I think it would shake it up a little bit, actually, but it's all to do with sustainability and safety, I suppose, with that argument. But just a little thought in there. Maybe somebody listening can let us know your thoughts on the strategy. The next thing I want to talk about is somebody that had a really poor weekend, actually, and obviously came into this weekend with a lot of controversy on their back, rightly or wrongly. I don't think we want to particularly comment and go down that route, but Mazepin. And
I thought you were going to go on about Vettel.
No, Mazepin. So, not an ideal start for him. Let's be honest. He's in a team with arguably this one of the most anticipated debuts ever in Formula One in Mick Schumacher, and there was certainly a lot of hype about that this week. There was interviews on BBC Breakfast and all over social media about Mick Schumacher starting. So that's already not an ideal start, being the sort of unwanted man of Haas. Of course, you had all the stuff that happened about Christmas, which I don't really want to go into. But then, 4 or 5 occasions this weekend, ending up facing the other way for whatever reason, and picking up the name Mazepin. What were your thoughts on the Russian's debut this weekend?
I think what happened in the race is somewhat forgivable, because I can guarantee he's not the first driver to put it in the wall in the first corner of his debut race, and he won't be the last. So for that, I don't think we can criticise too much. But the qualifying one was just terrible. Absolutely abysmal.
Well, there was 2 in qualifying, wasn't there?
Won't have made a lot of friends over that. But the first one in qualifying was okay. I can live with that. A little bit like the one in the race.
Yeah.
But the second one, at the end of Q1, to go past everyone, forget the gentleman's agreement, whereby, for anybody who's not quite sure listening, the idea is that everybody in the pit lane waits for the one driver to come out, and then everybody comes out at the same time. In a sport where millions is exchanged, that is the strategy that everybody goes for. Wonderful, isn't it? Yeah. And the strategy then, and the agreement is that everybody waits behind one another and everybody gets their turn. Mazepin didn't follow that, went to the front of the queue and went on his lap, and then spun at turn 1. So he then ruined the lap of anybody behind him, and that was just a real facepalm moment, because it just really attracted unwanted attention, and he could have very easily just stayed out of the limelight, because actually I think then, at that point, I might be wrong, but at that point he was ahead of Mick in the standings. Mm-hmm. But I think Mick was potentially ahead of him on track, so managed to get ahead of him on the grid.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those facepalm moments that you just think, well, you've got a lot to learn. But yeah, not the best weekend at all. We'll have to see how we get on in Imola, but
yeah,
it's worrying signs, but I don't think we can say too much too soon.
No, I agree. Everyone has a bad weekend, and hopefully for Nikita, it is going to be a one-off, and hopefully we'll see him do a lot better next week. I mean, whether you like him or loathe him or think he's gonna should be in F1 or shouldn't be, he is in F1, and we wouldn't want to wish anyone to just crash every week. So hopefully he shows some sort of potential going forward. The other person I wanted to talk about, you'll already know, but in a contrast to maybe Sergio Perez, who didn't have an ideal start to his Red Bull career, went out in Q2, and then, of course, looked like he was going to DNF on the formation lap, but recovered very strongly to finish 5th. A 4-time world champion, didn't have the greatest start to his Aston Martin career, and another man that's had a lot of hype on him over the winter, of seeing this as a fresh start, and maybe good for him and getting back to his best over the next couple of years at Aston Martin. It felt like history repeating itself a little bit this weekend with Sebastian Vettel, and I know you're a big fan of Vettel. So, what are your thoughts about him going out in Q1 and a bit of a scruffy race in general from the four-time world champion?
Yeah, it was a scruffy race. I'm not too sure about this Aston Martin because Stroll did pretty well, to be honest. He started in 10th and finished there, which suggests the car is about there, about pretty much bang on mid-grid. Seb didn't have a great qualifying, caused by the aforementioned Mazepin incident. I think based on where Stroll qualified, it would be pretty fair to say that Seb would have got out of Q1, and had he done, he'd probably done a lot better. He had that one incident with Ocon, which was his fault, and again, new car. I think we can excuse that. But yeah, I think like with Mazepin, it's maybe too early to say anything particularly untoward about Seb. I just think it was a bit of rotten luck, and the beauty with someone like Perez is he's got the car and the skill clearly to get up the grid. From where Seb was, could he have got much further up the grid? I'm not sure. So I think qualifying is quite a big one these days. Given he was 10 places behind his teammates, effectively 9 when Perez had to start for the pits, but it didn't help him. It didn't help him being that low down on the grid. So I think we can judge him a little bit better when he does get into maybe Q1 or Q2 or Q3. Interesting one about failing to respect the yellow flags. Not quite sure what that one's about because he definitely slowed down for the Mazepin incident. I think, as I understood, Sainz had a problem in Sector 2 and it might have been that. So the question is, why was it only Seb who didn't follow that? I'm not too sure about that. I'm not too sure because the steward's decisions, let's be honest, have been inconsistent in the past.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but it just felt like a really pointless penalty because he was only starting ahead of the Hasses, and if you start behind the Haas, well, it's not going to take long to get past them, especially if one bins it at turn 3.
Well, yeah, certainly in terms of where he started on the grid, it made no difference. But I did notice he had quite a harsh 3-point penalty given to him as well on his super license. So I don't know how many he's on, but he must be on a few now, and potentially a race ban at some point. I know Hamilton was very close to one last year. After that, I mean, he got his race ban with COVID, I suppose. But yeah, that's an interesting one to keep an eye on. 3 points seems a lot to give for the yellow flag incident, but which makes me think he must have done something fairly bad to warrant that. But I don't know what that could be, as you say. So just to finish off about the Bahrain Grand Prix, then we've talked about people that have maybe not impressed us so much, the likes of Bottas, Mazepin, Vettel, for instance. But who really did impress you this weekend, barring the obvious Hamilton and Max? Who was it that you looked at this weekend and thought, wow, I'm surprised at that?
I'll give you 3 names. Firstly, Leclerc at Ferrari. Pains me to say because I'm not a Ferrari nor Leclerc fan, but how he managed to get that car to 4th is beyond me. In qualifying, of course.
Yeah.
Daniel Ricciardo out-qualified his teammates. We know that Danny's good in quali, but to do that well in quali, we also found out he got damage on his car after that Gasly contact on lap 4, so could have potentially beat Norris in the race. And then Yuki Tsunoda as well. He had a really good debut. When we contrast it to the debut of poor old Mazepin, it was just a no faults debut, and it's obviously because he's using the number of one of the best drivers of all time.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more with those 3 names. I thought Sainz had a solid weekend as well. And Alonso making a decent return to the grid.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Alonso was really impressive. It was great to see Alonso back.
Yeah.
It was a great thing, and what a strange way to retire, getting a sandwich wrapper in one of your bride ducks.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's nearly as bad as the carrier bag incident, but
I know,
I don't
I
know.
know.
I don't know.
Or the beach
Great.
ball incident with Liverpool and Sunderland back in the day, eh?
Move on.
Yeah. So just a quick rundown of the top 10 then. Of course, we had Lewis Hamilton winning the Grand Prix, Max Verstappen second, Bottas finishing third, 37 seconds back, by the way, but did have the fastest lap.
Oh,
Lando
lucky him.
Norris in fourth, then Sergio Perez fifth, Leclerc sixth, Ricardo seventh, Sainz eighth, Sonoda ninth, and Lance Stroll rounding out the top 10. Kimi Raikkonen only a couple of seconds behind the points pin positions. Two DNFs with Fernando Alonso and Nikita Mazepin. Obviously, Latifi and Gasly, I don't think they. Well, they were classified. I don't think they quite got to the end, though.
Yeah, they got to.
Um,
It's the whole. I think it's the 85 or 90% rule, isn't it,
yeah,
that you get classified, but no, didn't make it to the checkered flag.
yeah. So that's the Bahrain Grand Prix then. What we are going to do now is sort of give our thoughts on the 10 teams and where we think they're at and what their potential is for this season. And I think a good place to start is at the bottom. And I think it's very obvious this year, and probably is going to be the whole year, is that Haas are very much the back markers this year, Mick Schumacher and Mazepin, of course, but they've come out and said they are not going to be developing the 2021 Challenger and are going to be focusing completely on 2022. So, tough year for Haas, I think.
Definitely. Not really much more to add. I think you've got it bang on there. They're going to struggle to get a point, really. I think they're similar to Williams a few years ago, unless there's a miracle. I can't see them getting a point. Well, that's if Mazepin finishes a race, but no, that's too harsh too soon.
Yeah. I
But,
mean,
two
potentially we
young.
could have another race that finishes with 10 runners at the end, and that might be how they score a point.
Yeah,
I don't see them.
it's nice to see some young talent in Formula One,
Yeah,
but I think unfortunately, um, I don't think we'll see the Haas name in F1 too much longer. I have a feeling that they're going to be bought out by somebody because after a brilliant start to their career in the few years they had, with some of the results they had with Grosjean and Magnussen, it just very much feels like one of those customer teams now that aren't really going to get anywhere. Very much, almost, I hate to say it, put in the same bracket as them, but almost like a Caterham or even Virgin sort of
yeah, they've sort
outfit
of had
that
the opposite run to what Marussia and Virgin had.
absolutely.
I think because by the end with Marussia, they at least had a Mercedes engine and could compete for midfield positions.
Yeah.
But Haas have yeah, they're well off at the moment, and
But as a positive, a good way to start for those two, because there's absolutely, I mean, there's a
yeah.
lot of expectation on Nick's shoulders naturally, but wherever they finish, they're only going to be judged against one another.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Now, I almost see Mick Schumacher in a similar position to George Russell of, he might get into Q2 or whatever, and that would be seen as a fantastic achievement, just like it is for George Russell, who seems to be the Saturday King at the moment. So let's move on to Williams. I think we've exhausted Haas. And Williams don't look too much further down the road than they were
No.
last season, but should be able to get into Q2 on a more regular basis, I think. And Nicholas Latifi certainly looked a lot closer to George Russell this weekend than he has done in the past. And no, I know you're not a fan of the look of the Williams, but they certainly seem to be heading in the right direction.
Well, looks don't really matter as long as you've got the personality, and the car's not too bad. I think that the unfortunate bit for Williams is that, to be fair, last year in 2020 they made huge gains.
Yeah.
They made the biggest gains on the grid, and this year they've made big gains, but unfortunately everybody else has,
Hmm.
except Haas. We'll move on to Alfa Romeo in a minute, but they've made some big gains, albeit it might be the engine that supported that mostly. But Williams again. Now that Haas are behind them, as you say, it might be a chance for both cars to get into Q2. But to be honest, I can't really see it because George is Mr. Saturday, but I don't see much improvement on last year. They're going to struggle to get points once again. I think they are, especially now Alfa Romeo have improved. They are very much in that bottom two with Haas,
Yeah.
but above Haas, most
Hmm.
certainly.
So yeah, you mentioned Alfa Romeo just then, and I think maybe pound for pound, a team that have made the most progress since last year. I know Alpha were very much, along with Haas and Williams, probably the back three teams last year. And Kimi and Gio were very, very regularly out in Q1, but I think they looked superb this weekend actually, and certainly showed potential of getting points, score, and finishes if they continue to develop that car and the right races fall for them. I thought Kimi and Gio looked pretty good.
Yeah, I agree. I really do. I think that although they were mentioned by a few, they are a team that are just generally not mentioned too much because they're always languishing in the midfield and don't do a lot more than that. But I think they've got one of the most understated driver pairings on the grid. Probably a lot of people knowing this might know my feelings towards Kimi, but Giovinazzi's keeping up with him, and that's not, I don't think, a mark of Kimi slowing down.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Gio's a pretty good driver, to be honest, and he's just never had the equipment to show it.
Mm-hmm.
Especially last year with that bogged down engine. But give them a few chances this year and they might get some points. Again, I think they're going to be in 8th this year. I can't see them being above that because of the strength of who's above them.
Yeah.
And I think, namely, they could be 7th, but for a certain Spaniard who's returned. And we'll talk about him in a minute. But yeah, I think they do look good. It was good to see Kimi having a few little scraps, and we didn't see much of Giovinazzi in the race, but no, they look pretty good. But once again, a little bit like Williams, they've improved, but because of the virtue of other teams improving, they're not going to go much further up the field.
Yeah, I couldn't add to that. I think you've hit the nail on the head. Quick question for you, and I know this one's close to your heart. Kimi Räikkönen, 2022 or no?
Good one. Good one. The funny thing with Kimi is his attitude like Fernando. Because Fernando, we all know, this the worst hidden secret that he doesn't care less about this year. He's back for 2022. Why would Kimi not give it a go next year? Unless he is booted out. Why would he not give it a go next year? Because even if the car's rubbish next year, then I mean, he's not exactly going out on a high this year, is he? So, what's the risk? He obviously loves the sport. Another season, and then from there, he can jack it in from then.
Mm-hmm. No, I think, depending on how the next few races go, I think he could be on there. I see it as a potential route for Mick Schumacher to get a little bit of an upgrade to move to Alpha, but yeah, who knows? We'll just have to see how the season goes, and it's whether Kimi wants it at the end of the day. I don't think Alfa Romeo will boot him out, as you put it. I think his experience is invaluable there, and you can tell because they're making progress. So, yeah, I hope he sticks about next year. But moving on to another team beginning with A, which is half the grid this season. Moving on to Alpine, who were formerly Renault, of course. And a bit of a surprising weekend for me on how slow they were. I've just had a little look at the 2020 Bahrain Grand Prix, which was, of course, not that long ago, really, back in November. So Esteban Ocon finished in 9th, and Daniel Ricciardo finished in 7th, and Ricciardo, namely, was only 20 seconds off the lead in the end. So quite the fall from grace by the looks of it for me. Ocon, of course, went out in Q1, which you very rightly predicted, and was nowhere in the race. Obviously was booted by Vettel, which wouldn't have helped, but yeah, it was a shocker for me, I think, from Alpine.
Do you know what? It wasn't a shock for me. It wasn't, because last year they had one man that helped them quite a bit, and he's gone.
Yeah.
Not Cyril, but Daniel Ricciardo. And I think one of the reasons that Cyril has gone is because they let their big championship protege, if you like. I know he's getting on a bit, but let's just stick with that. Ricciardo went to McLaren, and that's what really broke Renault, because although they've got Alonso back, which I'm going to upset some people here, but I think Alonso is one of the few people in the world who you would consider an upgrade on Daniel Ricciardo.
Mhm. Mhm.
And although it's brilliant that Alonso's back and there might be some chances next year, is Alonso really going to stick around for 5 years? Plus the fact, is Esteban Ocon a title contender? I don't think so, because at one point, Esteban Ocon was the main man to go to Mercedes,
Yeah.
succeeding Pascal Wehrlein before him. And now there's only one man, and that's George Russell.
Yeah, and I think, unfortunately for Ocon, he proved that he was very much Perez's equal in their days at Force India,
Yeah,
and on his day was quicker than Perez, and that's saying a lot for Ocon's ability. I think what did it for him is having that year out, and
absolutely.
although some great drivers in the past, and I'm thinking of Nico Hulkenberg in particular, had a year out and was incredible when he came back. I think Ocon has lost his edge a little bit, and I think coming into a team competing with Daniel Ricciardo, who is definitely one of the top five drivers in the sport at the minute, in my opinion. And it's no disgrace to get beat by Daniel Ricciardo, but
And that's the problem.
yeah,
That's the problem for Ocon. I
yeah,
think Ocon really relished a battle.
yeah,
That's why he did so well against Perez. With Alonso, he knows that it's a win-win. Don't beat Alonso, nobody really looks at him too badly. Beat Alonso and it's wow, but let's be honest, he's not going to beat. And I think it's exactly the same when he faced Daniel last year.
yeah.
He almost needs, again, I don't know who would be that Perez figure. I'd struggle to think, but I think Ocon is a little bit like Kimi, funnily enough. It all comes down almost to motivation, whether he can give that real extra 5 or 10%. And since he's come back, as you've said, I haven't seen anything special from him.
Other than a second place, I think it's Sakia. It was so the second running of the Bahrain Grand Prix last year,
But
but
much like Perez on that day, let's be fair, he
yeah.
was in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, no, but
After after the
it
after the
probably would
safety
have been a
car.
top six finish. Had it panned out normally anyway. I think Renault by the end of last season were comfortably the fourth best car, and I think that's what has almost surprised me the most. That over the winter they seem to have took a backward step.
And the
Um,
issue for me is a lack of direction. I just don't
yeah.
see where that team's going. There isn't the young gun that Ferrari's got. There isn't the young gun that McLaren, Red Bull, even
Well, I think
Haas. Well,
Ocon's.
every team in the every team on the grid, bar Mercedes, and Mercedes don't need one, have got an up and coming driver or something that gives them a bit of hope. What have Alpine got? They've got Fernando Alonso, which is wonderful, but long term, what have they got? What have they got in the pipeline? I
Mm,
just don't see it with Alpine, and that's I think Alpine and Haas have got the same issue. I just don't see where they go. I really don't see where they go, and that is the problem for them. That's why they've gone backwards. They're the sole team with that engine supplier,
yeah.
which is again another issue. I just think that they are going down a bit of a slippery slope, and to be honest, I think they're almost in no man's land. I really do. I think that they are ahead, comfortably ahead of that bottom four. I think they're probably comfortably ahead of Alfa Romeo on their day, but I think they're a long way off anybody else above them.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to where they were a few years ago when I think, predicted that Renault would comfortably be the fourth best team. Not, but it turned out very different, of course. And they're in that no man's land, and I agree with you in a way. I don't see the direction forward. I think Ocon was meant to be their superstar young gun because he's French in a French
Hmm.
team, and was very very fast at Force India, and I think they were maybe complacent with it, and Ocon hasn't quite delivered. My question to you, and just thinking about it, the French connection, do they need a Pierre Gasly in there?
Probably do, but why on earth would Gasly go there?
Where else does Gasly go? But we'll get to that in a bit. But
Good point.
Alpine,
A good point.
just a quick prediction for Alpine. Where do you think they're going to finish in the constructors this year, and where do you think Fernando Alonso's going to finish?
I've got a bit of a conflicting opinion because there's an easy answer here, and that's seventh, as I've discussed, above the bottom three teams. But then we know how good Fernando is. We know that he can pull out brilliant performances. My problem is who do they beat above them? AlphaTauri, no, don't think so. Aston Martin will be good enough. McLaren, no. Ferrari, no. So I just can't see them being anywhere above 7.
What about Fernando? Where do you think he'll finish?
Uh, Again, I'd like to say top 10, but the top 6 spots are booked out. And I feel like probably the next 4 are from any McLaren, Ferrari, or even AlphaTauri, or even Aston Martin. Again, I just can't see it. I
Yeah,
really can't see it.
it's going to be really tough, I think, for Fernando to finish top 10.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think we'll see a lot over the next couple of Grand Prix where exactly Fernando is. He had a good weekend this weekend, but I think very quickly it could turn sour, and I think that's one to watch this year at Alpine, and that's probably why we've spent a good 5-10 minutes talking about it. But moving on from Alpine and moving to somebody that we talked about before, AlphaTauri. So, of course, Pierre Gasly is still there after his demotion a season and a half ago now, which seems crazy that it was that recent. And they have the new fresh young gun that everybody's hyping up, but hopefully don't put too much pressure on him. The young Japanese driver with Jenson Button's number, Yuki Tsunoda. So, how did you feel about Alpha's weekend?
I thought they were really unlucky. I really did. I think Gasly was unlucky with the crash. They could have had a brilliant result with him. Sonoda, again, another one that was a little bit tough with qualifying. It was going to be tough to get any further up the grid. And given it was his first race, there's no problem with him qualifying where he did. He beat the teams he should have beaten. Okay, he was in an Alfa Romeo sandwich, but we'll let him off. We'll let him off after that. I was very disappointed. As I said, I think that there's a lot more to come from them. And they do excite me as being potentially the third best team on the grid. I really do think they could be the third best on the grid. Um, with some of the pace they showed, they could be level with Red Bull, but I think I'm getting a bit too excited there. But I think they very much could be in that battle between McLaren and Ferrari and then themselves.
Yeah.
But they are the only team really that we don't know where they are because of the virtue of where they were in the race.
Yeah, and I think Gasly has been very, very strong. Probably for the last 3/4 of a season, he's been one of the pound for pound best drivers on the grid. And he took his chance in at Monza to win a Grand Prix, and I think that's just given him the world of confidence, really. I'm hoping to see more from him this year. And Tsunoda, he had a terrific lap in Q1. I think it was second quickest or something, and looked very, very good. And we both said that it looks like a rocket, that AlphaTauri. I think a lot will be said after the Imola, a much more technical track. I think we'll really see the true performance of the car. Obviously, Bahrain is very much a point and squirt sort of circuit, so Imola will be very interesting for them, and it would be great to see them finish top 5 this year. I know that's what Franz Tost has wanted for a long, long time, for Toro Rosso, as they should always be known. But
Really don't see why not. I really don't see why not. And when we look at the next team, Aston Martin, if we go on to them next,
yeah,
it's a funny one with Aston Martin. It really is, because I feel like they've gone back the same way as Mercedes. But again, I don't think we've seen the true potential of that car. I think that, much like the Mercedes, will grow over the year. It's got new driver in Sebastian Vettel. Again, it will take time for him to get used to the car. They've lost a big asset in Sergio Perez. There's no question about that. And whether Vettel being, it's incredibly harsh to say as a 4-time champ, whether Vettel is the right replacement for Perez, I really don't know. But we'll have to wait and see on that. But it wasn't a bad weekend for them. Probably expecting a bit more, expecting to be ahead of AlphaTauri and Ferrari, but they weren't, and that's where they are. But again, it's a long season. I think with some of Seb's input, I think they can have some really good results. But I see them as being behind AlphaTauri. I really do. I'm really excited about that AlphaTauri, whatever they call it, Toro Rosso.
Toro Rosso. Minardi.
Yeah, well, exactly. But good old Yuki, it was great. Sorry, all right, I'm getting a bit too excited about Tsunoda. But we've talked about Vettel a lot. We haven't talked about Stroll too much, and Stroll just had a real bog standard weekend. But you know what? He did a good job, didn't he?
He did do a good job, and I was, pleasantly surprised to see him. I think the pressure's been took off him a little bit because everybody's on Vettel's back. People have gone off the whole, well, you're only in the sport because your dad's the owner. But we know that at the heart of that Aston Martin team is the old Force India team, and they were excellent at getting the best out of what they've got. And I do think they will have plenty of points scoring finishes this year. Do I think they're going to score regular podiums and be challenging Mercedes like they were last season at certain tracks? I don't see that performance this year.
I don't see them getting one podium. Never mind a
Yeah,
variety of
they
them.
might fluke one. Force India always did with Perez, and Stroll is
Yeah.
known for a fluky podium as well. So it could happen, but yeah, I think middle of the pack for them. So moving on, we have got Ferrari. I guess next would be a season to forget last year, but look like they've made some decent gains this year actually, and I think getting rid of the whole Vettel toxic atmosphere has really helped Ferrari over the winter, and getting somebody in like Carlos Sainz who isn't as fiery as Vettel, but is, for me,
Hmm.
just as quick.
Interesting. Interesting you say that. I was just about to bring something up, but firstly, I didn't expect to be talking about Ferrari this late on. Had a stupid prediction that they'd be near the bottom of the pack because the car looked terrible in testing, all over the place. But they've got two really good drivers. They have to be up there as probably the best on the grid. I think that there could be a real clash at Ferrari, despite what you've just said. I think there could be a real clash because Carlos Sainz is very chilled, laid back. But if he starts beating Charles Leclerc, there could be a real problem there.
Yeah, yeah,
Now, there might not be a problem whilst they're finishing 6th, 7th, and 8th because, oh well. But if it starts in a few years to becomes over wins and championships, we could have and I don't use this term lightly, a real sort of Senna versus Prost
yeah,
battle there.
yeah,
I
yeah.
really do think so. I think that there's the real potential for that. But based on their weekend and not getting ahead of ourselves too much, a little bit disappointing for Leclerc in the end. I think he'd have liked to beat the McLaren, but I think really down to strategy and a few other things, it didn't quite turn out to go. And again, Sainz had a solid race, solid debut. 12 points for the team. They'll be pretty happy with that. Just behind McLaren. And we'll have to see how that battle goes. But I'm really excited for that. Really sad, isn't it? I was just about to say 4 young guns in Norris, Charlie, Leclerc, Danny Rick, and Carlos Sainz. But poor old Ricardo. He's been in the sport for 10 odd years now, but he still feels like a young man.
Yeah,
Still feels like a young man.
and I think
But
it's his personality that makes him feel very young, and I think him and Norris will be an excellent combination for McLaren. I think Norris has come on leaps and bounds in the last 12 months. I know we had a podcast on when Norris was appointed, and we said, oh, he's going to be another Van Dorn, but to be fair to him, he's really turned it around the last 12 months, and was almost on par with Sainz last year, who we know Sainz is Verstappen's equal in the Toro Rosso years at least. So that is a great sort of benchmark to put Norris at, and I think it'll be a really good battle between him and Daniel, and they seem like they will get on. So I think it
Well,
could
I was
be a
just about to
really,
say that.
yeah,
I think you're right. But what's the dynamic there? Danny Ricciardo has been craving ever since he left Red Bull to be top dog
yeah,
somewhere. At Renault probably was, but the ambition wasn't there. McLaren, the ambition's there, but is he going to be top dog? I don't know. I think Norris has been there longer. It's his team at the moment, and if Norris keeps beating him, I know it's very early days, but just hypothesising. Again, does Danny Ricciardo start to get frustrated?
yeah, but potentially, I think Ricardo's very much got to earn the right to be top dog there. I think pound for pound, I think Ricardo does shade it for me. in terms of ability, and I think in a few Grand Prix maybe we'll see that. There's potentially a seat at Mercedes opening up or two maybe at the end of the season, and who's to say that Norris or Ricciardo wouldn't be in the running for one of those seats at the end of the season if they wanted to move on. But yeah, that's certainly an interesting point, and if Ricciardo is getting beat, much like he was to Verstappen, he started to get frustrated and look to jump ship. But where else can Ricciardo jump ship to at this point? And for me, it would only be Mercedes, if anywhere. He's not going to take a backward step. So, what to keep an eye on this year? Where do you think McLaren are going to finish in the constructors?
I really don't know.
And do you think they're going to win a Grand Prix? That's my second question.
No, they won't win a Grand Prix.
No.
No. I'm going to be really boring and say nobody outside Hamilton and Max will win a Grand Prix.
Yeah, Bottas will win
You
Abu Dhabi,
know,
probably.
just looking at how good they are, it's. I mean, actually, no. Let's be fair. Let's give Perez a chance. Let's give Sergio a chance. Imagine if they won in Mexico. That would be a lovely sight. And with fans back as well.
Yeah.
But where are McLaren going to finish? Let's go in my head. I'm going to say fourth.
Okay.
I know I hyped up the AlphaTauri, but let's be sensible and say they finish ahead of them. But virtue of Ferrari having some whopper results, the odd second and third, I'll go fourth.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a really close battle this season between McLaren and Ferrari. I think they've got almost identical talent-wise driver lineups, and I think it's going to come down to one or two results, like you say, and it could be a second or third place here and there. And I think on the day, if everything goes for them, I think both McLaren and Ferrari could be on the top step of the podium this year if Mercedes have an off weekend, if Red Bull break down, which they usually do. It's not like the old days where there was three teams that were, winning Grand Prix all the time. It's only two. So it only takes a tangle for Hamilton and Verstappen to open up the door for a potential Ferrari or McLaren victory. But both of them looking good this season. And of course, we've talked about Red Bull and Mercedes, and you've put your money on Lewis for the Drivers' Championship. But what do you think is going to happen in the Constructors? Do you think it'll be an unprecedented 8th consecutive World Constructors title for Mercedes? Or will it be Red Bull to get back on top?
Put my neck on the line and say Red Bull are going to win it. I just really fear for Bottas. I do. I think if Perez is on song, there isn't any reason why he can't be up there with the top two. Yeah. I think. And Bottas hasn't got that potential. He might have on the odd weekend, but consistently, I just don't think he has. Perez, I think, has got that. And I think it's a long year this year. And do I see Perez getting more podiums than Bottas? Yes. And that's what's going to decide it.
Yeah. Looking at the end of 2021, obviously both Mercedes drivers are out of contract. Where do you see that going? Who do you think will be in the silver brackets black arrows in 2022?
Oh, it's so hard, isn't it? It's so hard. Well, I think George Russell's a cert. That again is one of the worst kept secrets. If Hamilton retires, if Hamilton stays on, he won't have Russell as his teammate. We have two scenarios, and the second scenario is neither of them stay, Hamilton and Bottas. The first scenario is both of them, because Hamilton is very content with Bottas as his teammates for obvious reasons.
Yeah. But our Mercedes, as we've said, but if Bottas isn't pulling in the points the way Perez is for Red Bull, are Mercedes going to be happy with Bottas?
True.
He's been a fantastic Rubens Barrichello figure for Mercedes over the last few years. He'll finish second, he'll win you the constructors' title. But if he is struggling this year, as we suspect he might be, he seemed well off the pace in qualifying. do Mercedes pull the trigger and say, right, Bottas, we're not renewing your contract? Where does Bottas go, first of all? And, who could go in there as Lewis Hamilton's teammate?
I think for that scenario to happen, Lewis wins his 8th championship. Because if he doesn't win the championship, then Bottas keeps his seat, if you know what I mean. I think that if Lewis doesn't win the championship, then that's a fair excuse not to win the constructors.
Yeah.
But if Lewis wins the championship, he goes. So I don't see that sort of scenario, as I say. I think if Lewis stays, then Bottas stays as well. The only driver I can see feasibly partnering Russell at Mercedes is Daniel Ricciardo.
Yeah.
I don't see the Verstappen link. I really don't.
What about Norris?
Usual hype. I don't see it being Norris either. I just see Daniel Ricciardo. They want an experienced figure.
Gasly could be the other one.
They don't want 2 youngsters. They're
No.
not going to have 2 youngsters at Mercedes. So Daniel Ricciardo is the only driver at the right time of his career to go there.
What about, after a great season, turning it around after the first race, Sebastian Vettel?
No.
Not a chance. Not even the German link in there.
I just don't see it. I just don't see that. I really don't.
Nah. I think he's past his best, Vettel, but I hope I'm proved wrong. But there you have it. That is our first Joe and Toby Talk podcast. We're in this particular episode, we've been talking about Formula 1, and we're going to try and make a habit of that this season. Talking about the Grand Prix, giving our general thoughts. They probably won't be as long as this one. Of course, we've had a lot to talk about after 4 months away from F1 to get right back into the swing of things. But we will also be talking about other sporting events, particularly the World Snooker Championship, which will be coming up in a couple of weeks' time, and we will be having a full preview to that once the draw has been made. Do you have anything to add, Mr. TIJ?
Not really. Just really excited for the F1 season, and of course you alluded to the snooker as well. We've got a lot of good sporting events coming up. We've got the Masters, which Sky Bet are playing 11 places on 11. They only played 10 last year.
Wow!
And I'll still end up losing 40 quid.
Yeah.
So
because all your ones they'll finish 12th, no doubt.
Correct. Or they'll have a really good start and not make the cut. But this isn't a golf podcast, so nobody will have an idea what we're on about. So I'll just shut up. Grand National, though, in a few weeks. I've got no tips there. And if I did, that would be the horse to avoid. Based on what happened at Cheltenham.
Exactly. But thank you very much for listening to us in this first sort of episode of the reboot of Joe and Toby Talks. As I said, we've got our new YouTube channel now where this is all pumped out to, so make sure you click that subscribe button so you don't miss a podcast. Follow us on Spotify as well, and of course check us out on our gaming channels, Captain Goodspeed and TIJ Gaming, respectively. We've really enjoyed this talk, and thank you very much for listening. And we'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.